as we go through the 10th chapter of Ketubot, we're going to move from the question of the estate of a dead man and its relationship with the heirs of his deceased wife. So in other words, when the children of the deceased wives come to take their share of the estate, which is going to be related, by the way, to the size of the ketubah of their mothers, because the sons inherit the ketubah of the mothers. So if the ketubot of the mothers are unequal, then the sons will inherit in a proportion that is unequal. And we learnt in the second Mishnah of the 10th chapter that this rule of disproportionality, of inheriting an unequal share according to the quantity of the ketubah, only applies when there's enough money in the estate to pay out all the ketubot plus a little bit more. In other words, to pay out some inheritance over and above the ketubot. And if that's the case, the claims of the different groups of children are treated on the basis of the size of their mother's ketubot. But if there's not enough money in the estate, then the estate is merely divided equally. And we could express this rule as the rule of the contested claim. If there's a contested claim, in other words, if there's not enough money in the estate to cover all the claims on it, if there's a contested claim, then the two claimants are dealt with equally. They split 50-50. If the claim's not contested, then it's dealt with in proportion to the size of the claim. And as we move through the 10th chapter, we're going to gradually evolve this principle to the question of how we deal with an estate if the widows are living, but the ketubot are unequal and there may or may not be enough money to pay them out. Now, before we do that, in order to close off the question of inheritance, we're going to jump into the third Mishnah that deals with kind of property that might or might not be in the estate. So, effectively, what is the perimeter of the estate? There was property that shouldn't be in the state. Shouldn't be in the state. And it's not assumed to be part of the estate. And the text of the Mishnah is difficult here. Most printed texts miss out the word not, she'ein. Most printed texts have hayusham nechasim kvarui ve she'einan kvamuchzak. Most printed texts would say, look, there's property that seems to be on the horizon and we don't assume that's to be in the estate. Our Mishnah text is from Kaufman, and Kaufman seems to be saying, look, there was property that wasn't in the offing and wasn't assumed to be in the estate. Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Shimon says, even if there was unmortgageable property, in other words, movable property, and the principle of the Mishnah is going to be that in order for property to be included in the state for the sake of calculating its sufficiency, remember, we need to know whether it's sufficient before knowing whether to divide it up equally or divide it up according to the size of the claims. Before calculating the size of the estate, when we do this, we're only going to look at property which is mortgageable. Property which is not mortgageable, einan klum. It's just not included at all. Until there's mortgageable property yoter al shtei ketubot dinar, that was worth more, at least 1 dinar more than the 2 ketubot. So in other words, when we're establishing this rule, do we divide equally or do we divide in proportion to the claims? We only look at mortgageable property in the state. And that's not the case, by the way, for when there are wives involved who are still alive, and of course who can claim their ketubah from anything. And the Mishnah then goes on with a rule of division, which still relies on the rule of contested claims. And this is discussed by Robert Aumann, Aumann. You can find his article. If you just Google Robert Aumann, Aumann, and the Mishnah in Ketubot, you'll see his article on the rule of contested claim. And the Mishnah begins with quite a complex case of someone who had 3 wives. Misha haya nasui shalosh noshim. Someone was married to 3 wives. Umate, and he died. And the ketubot of all of these 3 wives are different. The ketubah of one was a maneh, and of the other 2, 100 zuz, and of the third 300 zuz. So these ketubot together add up to 600, but in the proportions 100, 200, 300. And the Bartanura comments, by the way, that these ketubot must have been signed on the same day. If they were signed on 3 separate days, then the earliest one would have come first. We've learned already that the prior claim takes precedence. But in this case, and the Bartanura is on the source sheet, but in this case, they seem to have been signed on exactly the same day, because the Mishnah rules, Ein sham eila maneh. If there's only 1 maneh, that's 100 zuz worth of assets. So that 100 zuz, in theory, might belong to any one of the 3 wives, because even the smallest ketubah was 100 zuz. There's only 100 zuz of assets. They all might have belonged to the 3 wives. Cholkim b'shaveh. They divided equally. The whole of the inheritance is contested, so it's divided equally. What if there were 200? Ayu shamatain. So there were 200 zuz in the estate. Shel maneh notaret chamishim. So the one with a maneh receives 50. Veshel matayim, veshel shloshmod, shlosha shel zahav. The one with a maneh receives 50, and the ones with 100 and, let's say the one with 200 and the one with 300, so the other 2, they get 75 each. 3 gold coins, the Mishnah says, but we know that 3 gold coins are 75 zuz. So now the divisions of the 2 are equal, but the first one only gets 50. How do we get the 50? Well, she received 33. She received 33 and a third, actually, from the equal division of the first 200. Of the first 200 of the estate. The first 100 of the estate. The first 100 of the estate was divided 3 ways. She got 33 and a third. Now, the second 100 of the estate goes according to a different rule, because at least one of the claims can be fully satisfied. The claim of the first wife can be fully satisfied. So now at this point, this part of the estate, the second 100, is divided according to the principles of the proportionality of the claims. Well, the first wife, whose ketubah is 100, she has a claim on 1/6 of the estate. And she will therefore get 1/6 of the second 100, to add to the 33 and a third she's already got. So she ends up with 50. Now, what about the others? Well, now, as far as the other two wives are concerned, there's 150 left in the estate, but that's not enough to service either of their claims. So they split equally 75, 75. What if there were 300 zuz in the estate? Hayushlam shloshmot. So there were 300 zuz in the estate. Shelmanenos helen chamishi. There were 300 zuz in the estate. Well, the first claimant, the one with a ketubah of 100, she gets 50. That's the same 50 she got previously. Vishel matai maneh, the one who had a claim on 200, she gets 100. Vishel shloshet me'ot shel zahav. And the one with 300 gets 6 gold coins. That's 150 zuz. And the Mishnah goes on to say this is a general rule. V'chen shlosha shehitilu la'kis otiru upachtu kach hen chokim. Similarly, if 3 people contribute to a fund and the fund lost or gained, they share in the same manner. And this halacha is actually brought down in Bava Batra. This is a standard way of dividing up property. That if it's a standard way of dividing up property. And for more details, have a look at Robert Oman's article or the Mishnah in Bava Batra.